All right. Looks like we're beginning this new section here. This paper, let's see, The Evolution of Marriage. Paper 82. Here, I'm also going live on Facebook here at the same time, so let me get that situated. There we go. Pop the collar, and then I extend blessings to all. I give thanks for this day, even though there's snow falling down from the heavens. I know prayers are being heard, are being sent to the heavens. And I extend my thanks for each of you who are listening to this message all about marriage. I'm reading from the Urantia book, a book that my father gave me as I was heading out to college back in 2004. Um, the book itself is hefty, and it took me quite a few times to comprehend it in total. I joined meetup groups in California and in Ohio where we would read the book and then talk over the sections. I would recommend that people do such if they desire, or you can find this book online, and you can always send me messages if you have any questions regarding the material. Now we're on paper 82, The Evolution of Marriage. Marriage and mating grows out of bisexuality. Marriage is man's reactional adjustment to such bisexuality. While the family life is the sum total resulting from all such evolutionary and adaptive adjustments, marriage is enduring. It is not inherent in biologic evolution, but it is the basis of all social evolution, and is therefore certain of continued existence in some form. Marriage has given mankind the home, and the home is the crowning glory of the whole long and arduous evolutionary struggle. While religious, social, and educational institutions are all essential to the survival of cultural civilization, civilizer, a child learns most of the essentials of life from his family and the neighbors. The humans of olden time did not possess a very rich social civilization, but such as they had, they faithfully and effectively passed on to the next generation. And you should recognize that most of these civilizations continue to evolve with a bare minimum of other institutional influences because the home was effectively functioning. And today, the human race possesses a rich social and cultural heritage, and it should be wisely and effectively passed on to the succeeding generations. The family, as an educational institution, must be maintained. Section 1. The Mating Instinct. Notwithstanding the personality gulf between men and women, the sex urge is sufficient to ensure that coming together for the reproduction of the species. This instinct operated effectively long before humans experienced much of what was later to be called love, devotion, and marital loyalty. Mating is an innate propensity, and marriage is its evolutionary social repercussion. Sex interest and desire were not dominating passions in primitive peoples. They simply took them for granted. Embellishments. The all-absorbing sex passion of the more highly civilized peoples is chiefly due to the race mixtures, especially where the evolutionary nature has been stimulated by the associative imaginations and the beauty appreciations of the Nodites and Adamites. But this Andite inheritance was absorbed by the evolutionary races, in such limited amounts as to fail to provide sufficient self-control for the animal passions, thus quickened and aroused by the endowment of the keener sex consciousness and stronger mating urges. Of the evolutionary races, the red man had the highest sex code. Really? Go my people. Yeah, go red people. Maybe some of you don't know, I'm a part Native American, the Oglala Native American. The regulation of sex in relation to marriage indicates, one, the relative progress of civilization, because civilization has increasingly demanded that sex be gratified in useful channels and in accordance with the mores. Two, the amount of andite stock in any people. Among such groups, sex has become expressive of both the highest and the lowest in both the physical and emotional natures. The Sangic races had normal animal passion, but they displayed little imagination or appreciation of the beauty and physical attractiveness of the opposite sex. What is called sex appeal is virtually absent even in present-day primitive races. These unmixed peoples have a definite mating instinct, but insufficient sex attraction to create serious problems requiring social control. The mating instinct is one of the dominant physical driving forces of human beings. It is the one emotion which, in the guise of individual gratification, effectively tricks selfish man into putting race welfare and perpetuation high above individual ease and personal freedom from responsibility. As an institution, marriage from its early beginnings down to modern times pictures the social evolution of the biologic propensity for perpetuation. The perpetuation, oh, that's such a hard word. Sorry. Of the evolving human species is made certain by the presence of this racial mating impulse, an urge which is loosely called sex attraction. This great biologic urge becomes the impulse hub for all sorts of associated instincts, emotions, and usages, physical, intellectual, moral, and social. With the savage, the food supply was the impelling motivation, but when civilization ensures plentiful food, then the sex urge many times becomes a dominant impulse, and therefore ever stands in need of social regulation. In animals, instinctive periodicity checks the mating propensity, but since man is so largely a self-controlled being, sex desire is not altogether periodic. Therefore, does it become necessary for society to impose self-control upon the individual. No human emotion or impulse, when unbridled and overindulged, can produce so much harm and sorrow as this powerful sex urge. Intelligent submission of this impulse to the regulations of society is the supreme test of the actuality of any civilization. Self-control, more and more self-control, is the ever-increasing demand of advancing mankind. Secrecy, insincerity, and hypocrisy may obscure sex problems, but they do not provide solutions, nor do they advance ethics. Section number 2, the restrictive taboos. The story of the evolution of marriage is simply the history of sex control through the pressure of social, religious, and civil restrictions. Nature hardly recognizes individuals, and it takes no cognizance of so-called morals. It is only and exclusively interested in the reproduction of the species. Nature compellingly insists on reproduction, but indifferently leaves the consequential problems to be solved by society, thus creating an ever-present and major problem for evolutionary mankind. This social conflict consists in the unending war between basic instincts and evolving ethics. Among the early races, there was little or no regulation of the relations of the sexes. And because of this sex license, no prostitution existed. Today, the Pygmies and other backward groups have no marriage institution. A study of these people reveals the simple mating customs followed by primitive races. But all ancient peoples should always be studied and judged in the light of the moral standards of the Moors of their own time. Free love, however, has never been in good standing above the scale of rank savagery. The moment societal groups began to form, marriage codes and marital restrictions began to develop. Mating has thus progressed through the multitudes of transitions from a state of almost complete sex license to the 20th century standards of relatively complete sex restriction. In the earliest stages of tribal development, the Moors and restrictive taboos were very crude, but they did keep the sexes apart. This favored quiet, order, and industry, and the long evolution of marriage and the home had begun. The sex customs of dress, adornment, and religious practices had their origin in these early taboos, which defined the ranges of sex liberties and thus and eventually created concepts of vice, crime, and sin. But it was long the practice to suspend all sex regulations on high festival days, especially May Day. Women have always been subject to more restrictive taboos than men. The early Moors granted the same degree of sex liberty to unmarried women as to men, but it has always been required of wives that they be faithful to their husbands. Primitive marriage did not much curtail man's sex liberties, but it did render further sex license taboo to the wife. Married women have always borne some mark which set them apart as a class by themselves, such as their hairdress, their clothing, veils, seclusion, ornamentation, and rings. Let's see. Now we're on section 3, early marriage Moors. Let's see, how are y'all doing here? All right, everybody, I'm over here in Xenia, Ohio. I'm at the Xenia Library, which, as you can see, they have an amazing studio set up for people who want to come in and do some recording. I'm reading paper 82 of the Urantia book. It's on the evolution of marriage. We're on section 3, the early marriage Moors. If you give me one moment, I'm going to go and get some water. Thank you for joining me, and I extend blessings to all of you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I'm on section number 3, the early marriage Moors. This is a hefty book here, and I hope y'all are able to follow. Just real quick, I want to say that this book, it has some amazing sections on Jesus's life and him growing up as a young man. At a later date, I'm looking forward to reading that section, because for my Christian brothers and sisters out there, I'm pretty sure it's going to help put things into perspective for us. All right, so marriage is the institutional response of the social organism to the ever-present biologic tension of man's unremitting urge to reproduction, or self-propagation. Mating is universally natural, and as society evolved from the simple to the complex, there was a corresponding evolution of the mating Moors, the genesis of the marital institution, wherever social evolution has progressed to the stage at which Moors are generated. Marriage will be found as an evolving institution. There always have been and always will be two distinct realms of marriage. The Moors, the laws regulating the external aspects of mating, and then the otherwise secret and personal relations between men and women. Always has the individual been rebellious against the sex regulations imposed by society, and this is the reason for this age-long sex problem. Self-maintenance is individual, but is carried on by the group, and perpetuation is social, but is secured by individual impulse. That's pretty tricky to comprehend there. The Moors, when respected, have ample power to restrain and control the sex urge, as have been shown among all races. Marriage standards have always been a true indicator of the current power of the Moors and the functional integrity of the civil government. But the early sex and mating Moors were a mass of inconsistent and crude regulation. Parents, children, relatives, and society all had conflicting interests in the marriage regulations. But in spite of all this, those races which exalted and practiced marriage naturally evolved to higher levels and survived in increasing numbers. In primitive times, marriage was the price of social standing. The possession of a wife was a badge of distinction. The savage looked upon his wedding day as a marking of his entrance upon responsibility and manhood. In one age, marriage has been looked upon as a social duty, in another as a religious obligation, and in another as a political requirement to provide citizens for the state. Many early tribes required feats of stealing as a qualification for marriage. Later peoples substituted for such raiding forays athletic contests and competitive games. The winners in these contests were awarded the first prize, the choice of that season's brides. And among the head hunters, a youth might not marry until he possessed at least one head, although such skulls were sometimes purchasable. As the buying of wives declined, they were won by a riddle contest, a practice that still survives among many groups of the black men. With advancing civilization, certain tribes put the severe marriage tests of male endurance in the hands of the women. They thus were able to favor the men of their choice. These marriage tests embraced skill in hunting, fighting, and the ability to provide for a family. The groom was long required to enter the bride's family for at least 1 year, then there to live and to labor, to provide, to prove that he was worthy of the wife that he sought. The qualifications of a wife were the ability to perform hard work and to bear children. She was required to execute a certain piece of agricultural work within a given time, and if she had borne a child before marriage, she was all the more valuable. Her fertility was thus assured. The fact that ancient peoples regarded it as a disgrace or even a sin not to be married explains the origin of child marriages. Since one must be married, the earlier the better. It was also a general belief that unmarried persons could not enter spirit land, and this was a further incentive to child marriages, even at birth and sometimes before birth, contingent upon sex. The ancients believed that even the dead must be married. The original matchmakers were employed to negotiate marriages for diseased individuals. One parent would arrange for these intermediaries to effect the marriage of a dead son with a dead daughter of another family. Among later peoples, puberty was the common age of marriage, but this has advanced in direct proportion to the progress of civilization. Early in social evolution, peculiar and celibate orders of both men and women arose. They were started and maintained by individuals more or less lacking normal sex urge. Some tribes married the young men to the widows and older women, and then, when they were subsequently left widowers, would allow them to marry the young girls, thus ensuring, as they expressed it, that both parents would not be fools, as they conceived would be the case if two youths were allowed to mate. Other tribes limited mating to similar age groups. It was the limitation of marriage to certain age groups that first gave origin to the ideas of incest. In India, there are even now no age restrictions on marriage. Under certain Moors, widowhood was greatly to be feared, widows being either killed or allowed to commit suicide on their husbands' graves, for they were supposed to go over into spirit land with their spouses. The surviving widow was almost invariably blamed for her husband's death. Some tribes burned them alive. If a widow continued to live, then her life was one of continuous mourning, an unbearable social restriction, since remarriage was generally disapproved. In olden times, many practices now regarded as immoral were encouraged. Primitive wives, not infrequently, took great pride in their husbands' affairs with other women. Chastity and girls was a great hindrance to marriage, because the bearing of a child before marriage greatly increased a girl's desirability as a wife, since the man was sure of having a fertile companion. Many primitive tribes sanctioned trial marriage until the woman became pregnant, when the regular marriage ceremony would be performed. Among other groups, the wedding was not celebrated until the first child was born. If a wife was barren, she had to be redeemed by her parents, and the marriage was annulled. The Moors demanded that every pair have children. These primitive trial marriages were entirely free from all semblance of license. They were simply sincere tests of fecundity. The contracting individuals married permanently just as soon as fertility was established. When modern couples married, with the thought of convenient divorce in the background of their minds, if they are not wholly pleased with their married life, then they are, in reality, entering upon a form of trial marriage, and one that is far beneath the status of the honest adventures of their less civilized ancestors. Let's see, that's the end of section 3. How are all y'all doing? Thank you for joining me. I'm reading a book here called the Urantia book. It's one that I read as a young man going to college. My father gave me this book, and while I was in the airplane, I was trying to read it, and there was a couple of people sitting next to me who were married, this Christian man and woman, and I was also a Christian, pretty devout Christian at that time. I read the book with them, and we were all like, "What? What is this? What's that mean? What does this mean here?" It was a lot of the words as we were trying to read it. The three of us together were going over our heads. We're like, "I don't comprehend this at all. Let's like flip through a few chapters. What's this section about? All right, let's try to understand this." When we got to the papers on Jesus' life, then we began to relax about what we were reading and could comprehend it a little bit better. Now we're on section number 4, marriage under the property mores. Marriage has always been closely linked with both property and religion. Property has been the stabilizer of marriage, religion, and the moralizer. Here, I'm looking out for my brother James here. He's supposed to be coming in here at some point once he finishes his phone call. Hopefully he doesn't take too long, or I might have this recording finished before he even gets here. But let me go ahead and continue. Primitive marriage was an investment, an economic speculation. It was more a matter of business than an affair or flirtation. The ancients married for the advantage and welfare of the group, wherefore their marriages were planned and arranged by the group, their parents and elders. And at that, the property mores were effective in stabilizing the marriage institution. It is borne out by the fact that marriage was more permanent among the early tribes than it is among many modern peoples. As civilization advanced and private property gained further recognition in the Moors, stealing became the great crime. Adultery was recognized as a form of stealing, an infringement of the husband's property rights. It is not therefore specifically mentioned in the early codes and Moors. Women started out as the property of her father, who transferred his title to her husband, and all legalized sex relations grew out of these pre-existent property rights. The Old Testament deals with women as a form of property. The Quran teaches their inferiority. Man had the right to lend his wife to a friend or guest, and this custom still obtains among certain peoples. Modern sex jealousy is not innate. It is a product of the evolving Moors. Primitive man was not jealous of his wife. He was just guarding his property. The reason for holding the wife to stricter sex account than the husband was because her marital infidelity involved descent and inheritance. Very early in the march of civilization, the illegitimate child fell into disrepute. And I'll maybe put like a little small bookmark here. Some of you would actually in the Bible would comprehend that is, who is it? Isaac? And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to look that up later. But in the Bible, we do know about that because it's about the Muslim, how the Muslims detached from Christianity. It's similar to that. Very early in the march of civilization, the illegitimate child fell into disrepute. At first, only the woman was punished for adultery. Later on, the Moors also decreed the chastisement of her partner. And for long ages, the offended husband or the protector father had the full right to kill the male trespasser. Modern peoples retain these mores, which allow so-called crimes of honor under the unwritten law. Since the chastity taboo had its origin as a phase of the property mores, it applied at first to married women, but not to unmarried girls. In later years, chastity was more demanded by the father than by the suitor. A virgin was a commercial asset to the father. She brought a higher price. As chastity came more into demand, it became the practice to pay the father a bride fee in recognition of the service of properly rearing a chaste bride for the husband-to-be. When one once started, this idea of female chastity took such hold on the races that it became the practice literally to cage up girls, actually to imprison them for years, in order to assure their virginity. And so the more recent standards and virginity tests automatically gave origin to the professional prostitute classes. They were the rejected brides and those women who were found by the groom's mothers to not be virgins. I hope this is putting things into place for where we are in this current day, in our modern times, because all these past things have had an impact on our modern times, on how men and women react and try to talk to one another. And it's all this dramatic dance between the men and women who don't exactly understand the English that the other are using. And then there is like this divide, that we are still trying to step across just so that men and women can be comfortable around one another. Section 5 here is called, how do you say that word? How do you say that word? Here, I'm going to give it my best. Endogami and exogamy. I don't know what those words mean either. Here, hold on. Check this out. What I have here is called a mana stone. I like to spin it around because it makes me feel more in connection to spirit when I spin my mana stone around. And then I might put it on my forehead because it's cool, my forehead. All right, let me go ahead and I'm going to look up this word here for y'all so that we can all know what this word means. Endogamy is the custom of marrying only within the limits of a local community, clan, or tribe. So exogamy must be the opposite of that. Let me go ahead and look up exogamy as well. Exogamy is the custom of marrying outside a community, clan, or tribe. Aha! Interesting. I wonder why these terms are alien to my mind right now. And probably, I assume, alien to your mind as well. One moment, I'm responding to my friend's message here. All right. And also, thank you for joining me. All that have come into this live recording here. The section on marriage and its evolution is putting a lot of things into perspective for myself, and I hope it's putting some things into perspective for you. I am reading the Urantia book, and I'm currently on paper 82, The Evolution of Marriage. We're on section 5, Endogami and Exogamy. Very early, the savage observed that race mixture improved the quality of the offspring. It was not that inbreeding was always bad, but that outbreeding was always comparatively better, and therefore the Moors tended to crystallize in restriction of sex relations among near relatives. It was recognized that outbreeding greatly increased the selective opportunity for evolutionary variation and advancement. The outbred individuals were more versatile and had greater ability to survive in a hostile world. The inbreeders, together with their Moors, gradually disappeared. This was all a slow development. The savage did not consciously reason about such problems, but the latter and advancing peoples did, and they also made the observation that general weakness sometimes resulted from excessive inbreeding. While the inbreeding of good stock sometimes resulted in the upbuilding of strong tribes, the spectacular cases of the bad results of the inbreeding of hereditary defectives more forcibly impressed the mind of man, with the result that the advancing Moors increasingly formulated taboos against all marriages among near relatives. Religion has long been an effective barrier against outmarriage. Many religious teachings have proscribed marriage outside the faith. So you'll understand then that religion is a form of endogamy, forcing marriages to be more within the tribe and community. Women has usually favored the practice of in-marriage, and man out-marriage. Property has always influenced marriage, and sometimes, in an effort to conserve property within a clan, Moors have arisen compelling women to choose husbands within their fathers' tribes. Rulings of this sort led to a great multiplication of cousin marriages. Inmating was also practiced in an effort to preserve craft secrets. Skilled workmen sought to keep the knowledge of their craft within the family. Superior groups, when isolated, always reverted to, how do you say that word? Consanguineous mating. Consanguineous mating. The Nodites, for over 150,000 years, were one of the great in-marriage groups. The later day in-marriage Moors were tremendously influenced by the traditions of the violet race, in which at first matings were perforce between brother and sister, and brother and sister marriages were common in early Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and throughout the lands once occupied by the Andites. The Egyptians long practiced brother and sister marriages in an effort to keep the royal blood pure, a custom which persisted even longer in Persia, among the Mesopotamians, and before the days of Abraham. Cousin marriages were obligatory. Cousins had prior marriage rights to cousins, and Abraham himself married his half-sister. But such unions were not allowed under the later Moors of the Jews. The first move away from brother and sister marriages came about under the plural wife Moors, because the sister wife would arrogantly dominate the other wife or wives, and some tribal Moors forbade marriage to a dead brother's widow, but required the living brother to beget children for his departed brother. There is no biologic instinct against any degree of in-marriage. Such restrictions are wholly a matter of taboo. Outmarriage finally dominated because it was favored by the man. To get a wife from the outside ensured greater freedom from the in-laws. Familiarity breeds contempt. So, as the element of individual choice began to dominate mating, it became the custom to choose partners from outside the tribe. Many tribes finally forbade marriages within the clan. Others limited mating to certain castes. The taboo against marriage with a woman of one's own totem gave impetus to the custom of stealing women from neighboring tribes. Later on, marriages were regulated more in accordance with territorial residence than with kinship. There were many steps in the evolution of in-marriage into the modern practice of outmarriage. Even after the taboo rested upon in-marriages for the common people, chiefs and kings were permitted to marry those of close kin in order to keep the royal blood concentrated and pure. The Moors have usually permitted sovereign rulers certain licenses in sex matters. The presence of the later Andite peoples had much to do with the increasing of the desire of the Sangic races to mate outside of their own tribes. But it was not possible for outmating to become prevalent until neighboring groups had learned to live together in relative peace. Outmarriage itself was a peace promoter. Marriages between the tribes lessened the hostilities. Outmarriage led to tribal coordination and to military alliances. It became dominant because it provided increased strength and was a nation builder. Outmarriage was also greatly favored by increasing trade contracts. Adventure and exploration contributed to the extension of the mating bounds and greatly facilitated the cross-fertilization of racial cultures. The otherwise inexplicable inconsistencies of the racial marriage Moors are largely due to this outmarriage custom, with its accompanying wife stealing and buying from foreign tribes, all of which resulted in a compounding of the separate tribal mores. That these taboos respecting in-marriage were sociologic and not biologic is well illustrated by the taboos of kinship marriages, which embraced many degrees of in-law relationships, cases representing no blood relation whatsoever. All right, I'm going to pause here, but we are at section number 6, racial mixtures, which I kind of look forward to this section here because we just learned a lot here in the section number 5, endogamy and exogamy. New words for you. I want to extend blessings to my family, tribe, and friends who are all here in the live feed that you're hearing. I'm reading the Urantia book. It's a hefty spiritual book that my own father handed to me back when I was roughly what? Well, how old was I? 22? No, I think I was 24. I'm sorry here. I would have to do some heavy math to figure this out, but this was in 2004 when I first came across this book as I was flying out to California. Oh wait, 2001 I was 19, 220. Oh yeah, I was 24. Interesting. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So, racial mixtures. There are no pure races in the world today. The early and original evolutionary peoples of color have only two representative races persisting in the world: the yellow man and the black man. And even these two races are much mixed with the extinct colored peoples. While the so-called white race is predominantly descended from the ancient blue man, it is admixed more or less with all other races, much as is the red man of the Americas. And of the 6 colored Sangic races, 3 were primary and then 3 were secondary. And though the primary races, blue, red, and yellow, were in many respects superior to the 3 secondary peoples, it should be remembered that these secondary races had many desirable traits which would have considerably advanced the primary peoples if their better strains could have been absorbed. Present-day prejudice against half-caste, hybrids, and mongrels arises because modern racial crossbreeding is, for the greater part, between the grossly inferior strains of the races concerned. You also get unsatisfactory offspring when the degenerate strains of the same race intermarry. If the present-day races of Urantia could be freed from the curse of their lowest strata of deteriorated, anti-social, and feeble-minded and outcast specimens, then there would be little objection to a limited race amalgamation. And if such racial mixtures could take place between the highest types of the several races, still less objectification could be offered. Hybridization of superior and dissimilar stocks is the secret of the creation of new and more vigorous strains. This is also true of plants and animals, as with the human species. Hybridization augments vigor and increases fertility. Race mixtures of the average or superior strata of various peoples greatly increases the creative potential, as is shown in the present population of the United States of North America. When such matings take place between the lower or inferior strata, creativity is diminished, as is shown by the present-day peoples of southern India. Race blending greatly contributes to the sudden appearance of new characteristics, and if such hybridization is the union of superior strains, then these new characterizations will also be superior traits. As long as present-day races are so overloaded with inferior and degenerate strains, race intermingling on a large scale would be most detrimental. But most of the objections to such experiments rests on social and cultural prejudices rather than on biological considerations. Even among inferior stocks, hybrids often are an improvement on their ancestors. Hybridization makes for species improvements because of the role of the dominant genes. Racial intermixtures increases the likelihood of a larger number of the desirable dominants being present in the hybrid. For the past 100 years, more racial hybridizations has been taking place on the Urantia, or Earth, than has occurred in thousands of years. The danger of gross disharmonies as a result of crossbreeding of human stocks has been greatly exaggerated. The chief troubles of half-breeds are due to social prejudices. The Pitcairn experiment of blending the white and Polynesian races turned out fairly well, because the white men and the Polynesian women were of fairly good racial strains. Interbreeding between the highest types of the white, red, and yellow races would immediately bring into existence many new and biologically effective characteristics. These three peoples belong to the primary Sangic races. Mixtures of the white and black races are not so desirable in their immediate results, and neither are such mulatto offspring so objectionable as social and racial prejudice would seek to make them appear. Physically, such white and black hybrids are excellent specimens of humanity, notwithstanding their slight inferiority in some other respects. When a primary Sangic race amalgamates with a secondary Sangic race, the latter is considerably improved at the expense of the former, and on a small scale, extending over long periods of time, there can be little serious objection to such a sacrificial contribution by the primary races to the betterment of the secondary groups. Biologically considered, the secondary Sangics were in some respects superior to the primary races. After all, the real jeopardy of the human species is to be found in the unrestrained multiplication of the inferior and degenerate strains of the various civilized peoples, rather than in any supposed danger of their racial interbreeding. And this section here was presented by the Chief of Seraphims stationed on Earth, or Urantia. Thank you for joining me. This ends section number 82, or paper 82, The Evolution of Marriage. I hope you all enjoyed that section. It brought some things to light for myself personally. I'm going to give us a prayer here for North America and the other nations. Thank you, Lord, for providing us with sustenance and with knowledge that increases our intelligence, as is with this book here, the Urantia book. It stands on par with the Bible and other religious texts for what it shares. And with section 83, I think we're going to be even further blessed with further comprehensions of what we can do with our marriages, and for us young men who are still unmarried, like me. I have no children, I'm not married, yet I would love to have children and to be a teacher for other people's children, to read books to those who have trouble paying attention to a book themselves. I would love to help you pay attention to a whole book. I will be there for my friends and tribe. The next section here is paper 83, the marriage institution. I'm going to go ahead and close out this live video, and I will be doing section 83 in a new video. It has almost been an hour for this one. My gosh. Aho and aloha, sisters and brothers. Ba-ba-da-bum. Ba-ba-ba-bum. Testing, testing. All right, good. Wait a second here.